So attendees can join now, right?
We are live. Good luck.
Yeah, should we go? Folks joining. Let's start with some questions for the chat. Greetings from Mexico. Awesome. Mexico. Where else are people calling in from as we wait for a few more folks to trickle in? Michigan, kind of like Mexico. A lot in common between Michigan and Mexico. Belgium, nice. Michigan and Belgium probably have a little bit more in common. California has more in common with Mexico. I believe that California used to be part of Mexico. New York City, hate that place, never go there. Just kidding, I'm in New York City as well. I'm in Brooklyn. Kim, where in New York City are you? Taylor Davis is here. Is that the Taylor Davis that I know and love? Williamsburg North, I'm in Williamsburg South. So we can meet for a coffee right after this. I'm going to assume that is the Taylor Davis. It won't blow up his spot, but cool. Heading to Chipotle as we speak. Geez, Louise. With so many good restaurant options in this neighborhood, you head to Chipotle. That's okay. I assume that you have something important to do, like go to Whole Foods or something on the way. All right, let's just wait literally not even 60 seconds, and then we'll jump straight into it because nobody wants to answer the other questions of cold email, opt-in email, or both, and what email services you use and deliverability problems or not. So I'm just going to assume that everyone here is answering those questions inside their heart, even if they're not sharing it out loud. Okay, Bill, like to learn recent changes in email services. What I need to do to help ensure my emails are being delivered. Okay, Bill, are you sending cold email or are you talking about opt-in email for e-commerce or something like that? Cold email, sales loft, Gmail native, feels decent, but could be better. Cold email. Okay, got it. Cool. Well, you are in cold email land, and that's the land that we live in. So today we're mainly going to be talking about cold email. There's some stuff that overlaps, but generally cold email. Awesome. So what I always ask people is how deep down the deliverability rabbit hole they've gone. Our team, on a very basic level, Senders specializes in pulling people out of the rabbit hole, keeping them out of the rabbit hole. We're a do-it-for-you cold email deliverability service. It's not for everybody, but when companies really need their emails to be sent and delivered, and they need to do it at a scale that makes sense for their business, usually 400 to 4,000 emails a day, they turn to us. And we do what we call volume-based retainers. So depending on the volume of emails that you need to send, we charge a relative amount. The reason why that's important for this conversation is we send a lot of cold email on behalf of our clients. Last count's about 30 million cold emails in the last 12 months. And that means that we accrue a lot of expertise. And it means that we see what folks are doing out and posting about on LinkedIn and all these other places. And we can see that's kind of odd advice. That's kind of misleading advice, or that's kind of a weird way to think about this. And so the purpose of webinars like this is to share the expertise that we develop from our team and then try to find the people that are a little bit at their wits' end, like they've kind of tried a bunch of stuff and they don't really want to try things anymore. They just want someone to help them sort of, solve it. All right. So I'm going to start with a very, very basic question. This is clickbait all over the internet. Everyone knows this. Is cold email dying or is it thriving? I would say that much like a old growth forest, there's always something dying and there always is something thriving. And the sort of different kinds of things that die are the people that are trying to do specific things in specific ways. And whatever specific way that might be, it actually might not be working. That method may have died. So I'll give you an example. Just a few years ago, very, very short emails that were very vague, that were kind of intriguing, those worked. You could be like, what if I told you, or something, what if I told you you could cut costs by 1/3 and have a happier team and work-life balance? Would that interest you? And not too many years ago, people literally would reply with like, yeah, that sounds great. Send over more info. Well, that's dead. And there's a whole list of things that are dead. There's a whole list of things that we used to do in 2015, 2016, 2017 that used to work that just don't work anymore. So in that sense, yes, cold email is dying. Now, is cold email thriving? Well, sure, there are new ideas and there are new approaches, and there's a new norm for cold email that is working and thriving. And we still have, we have 70, 80 concurrent clients, but other folks I know who have outbound agencies who have 10, 20 clients in different companies, that everyone is finding ways to use cold email as a method and medium for partner acquisition in a way that is working. So the answer to the question is no, it is not dying, although lots of things in cold email are dying. So when we talk about cold email, we're really talking about 4 different elements. We're talking about domains, IPs, DNS, and actual usage of email. DNS is the code, SPF, DMARC, DKIM, the code that sits in the back of the website and helps authenticate emails and make sure that things are being delivered. If you don't have DNS records properly set up, we have an email tester we built for senders for free. You can just send an email to an address and it'll let you know if your DNS records are properly configured. If you're confused about DNS in particular, there's lots of help for it online. You can even reach out to our team and we're happy to help you. Domains and IPs get a little bit dicier. That's when a lot of the information, misinformation, confusing information come into play. We're mainly going to be talking about those 2 things, and we'll talk a little bit about particulars of email usage. But the purpose of today is to go over questions, sort of common questions that people have and ask that we hear a lot of misleading or very confusing information about. So question 1, a little bit deep in the weeds to kick off. But if you have follow-up questions, just drop them in the chat. But basically, there's a question about dedicated IPs versus shared IPs. An IP is referring to the address that an email is delivered from. We're not talking the domain. We're talking about the string of numbers that represents where an email is sent from and to somewhere else. Those are important. IP addresses are important because you need an IP address to carry a message through. If you use something like Google or Gmail, like in the case Kim uses Gmail, which is fine, Gmail has a giant set of IP addresses that when you click send in Google, it's choosing an IP address from their very, very large arrays of IP addresses and using that to send your email. You don't get any visibility into your Google IPs. You get visibility after the fact, but you don't get to choose like, ooh, I like this IP address or I like that IP address. Now, that's fine because Google has very, very good email IP management, but that's not fine if you're trying to go out of the bounds of sending email beyond what Google lets you do. So in the case of companies like ours that send very high volumes of email, 400 to 4,000 emails per day for a particular client, you can't really use Google to do that unless you're going to be doing that kind of game where you set up like 10 Google accounts or 20 Google accounts, which we don't recommend because it violates Google's terms of service or their acceptable use policy. And it's just sort of a kind of shady way to do things. So the next question is, if you are going to be separating out the elements of email, that exposes IP addresses, meaning now you have the ability to choose what IP address you're going to be sending emails from. And the first question you're faced with is, should I use dedicated or shared IPs? On a very basic level, dedicated means this IP or these IPs are only associated with me and my sending. And a shared IP on a basic level means these IP addresses that we're sending from, like the Gmail example, they're being shared across other users, potentially users that I don't know, or neighbors that I don't know anything about. This is sort of a trick question. People who sell dedicated IPs will tell you dedicated IPs are better. Buy dedicated IPs from us. People that manage internet infrastructure or manage something like Gmail, they would say, well, obviously shared IP pools are better as long as everyone who's in the shared pool is acting responsibly and we're taking care of the IP addresses very carefully. I would say that the question is actually more of a gray area. It actually sits somewhere in the middle. The most effective way to do this is probably a very, very well managed and maintained small pool of IPs instead of a single IP, but a pool of IPs. And then the lowest common denominator is how healthy and happy are these IP addresses? How warm are they? How are they being cared for? In other words, are they being stress tests? Are they looking at whether they're ending up on blacklists and blocklists? Is somebody actually maintaining these? And this comes to the biggest problem we see with the self-managed systems that people set up for cold email is that they're self-managing, but actual IP address management is not very fun. It's a big pain. It requires a lot of time, effort, energy. And in many ways, IP address management is one of the reasons why we have clients at all. We're minding domains and IPs and other things as well. But on the IP side, we're the ones making the decision, is this IP in good standing or bad? And then we're swapping it out, we're rotating them, we're keeping them all healthy. So the answer to this question is somewhere in the middle, probably a small group or a small array of dedicated IPs that are very, very well managed is the likely answer to the question. Any follow-up questions on this, feel free to drop them in. I'm going to move on to the next one, but always happy to go back and rattle on more about IP addresses. Okay, question 2. Does warming actually work? A lot of confusion about warming. Well, basically, to explain what a warming software is, warming itself is sending emails in a sort of dedicated way to make sure that you're not surprising the internet with hundreds or thousands of emails in one go, but you're sort of building up to that amount. Well, the way warming systems work is they have a giant pool of users, and those pool of users in the background email each other back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And then if something is marked as spam, it moves it to the inbox. And the idea being you're training the internet that email traffic should be coming from something like your email address and that it is good traffic. The short answer to why warming has a place in the ecosystem is that it changes the sending ratio. And ratios really matter. I actually did an entire presentation just on ratios. If you're really interested in it, I don't know if someone from my team can grab a link and drop it in down here in the chat. But it was with another email company, and we dug into just ratios, just talking about what ratios are. Ratios, in this case, we're talking about what percentage or what ratio of emails are being opened versus not opened, are bouncing versus not bouncing, are being replied to versus not replied to, are being clicked on versus not clicked on. And the better your sending ratios are, overall, generally, the healthier your email stays. So if you send 100 emails and 98 of them open it, well, that's a really good ratio. If 7 of them reply, well, that's pretty good reply rate. If 15 of them get clicked on, it's clear that there's a ratio of send versus interacted with positively is a good ratio. In the case that you have a bad ratio, you send 100 emails and 2 people open it and 1 replies, well, that's a bad ratio. So what email warming does is it manipulates the ratio of sends to open and sends to reply. So what that means is the combination of your traffic, of your actual genuine cold email outbound, combined with the artificial traffic, evens out to being higher than it would be on its own. So if you were getting a 20% open rate on your cold emails like normal, or a 50% open rate, let's say, and the warming emails are getting 100% open rate, those two things get combined and the average of the two becomes your open rate. So you're basically boosting all of your ratios while using warming systems. That's technically how they work. There are a lot of issues with warming systems, and there's a lot of debate as to like which one's better. But on a basic level, warming on a theoretical level changes ratios, and that's why it works. All right, next question. How many daily emails can a domain send? In our experience and general consensus is there is an unlimited number of emails that a single domain can send. If you look at very, very big email senders, like a national or international airline, or UPS, or FedEx, or Facebook, they're sending hundreds of millions potentially of emails a day, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of emails a day. Most of those organizations I mentioned really only send from one or two domains, maybe 5 domains in total. And the reason why they send from so many domains and the reason why they're able to send so many emails is their domains are healthy and their domains are aged, and their domains are kept healthy and kept aged because obviously age doesn't wear off. They need to be able to send these, and they've built up to them over time, and they're older brands with established domains. So if UPS is sending millions of emails a day or millions of emails a second, even from a single email address, there's nothing stopping them from doing that because these emails are essentially welcome. What we find is that if you're doing cold and you're not so welcome, domains can typically send as many as 4,000 emails a day without having any issues. Now, we're not talking, again, to go back to the previous question or one of the previous ones, if you're sending from Google, you're subject to their limits. If you're sending from another email service provider, you're subject to their limits. But if we're talking about just raw email, there is no limit to the number of emails that a domain can send. We find that around 4,000 emails per day for a single domain is where we start to think about introducing another domain. Now, for those listening who are sort of confused in some way, I'm not necessarily talking about sending from an email domain directly like senders.co. Typically, in order to bolster a domain, you introduce a sending subdomain. So it would be something like email.senders.co, that kind of thing. So even though the root domain is the same, there might be subdomains built on top of it that make it so you can send more emails without causing as much damage or any damage on the way in. So that's typically what we employ. And we oftentimes find that a subdomain can sustain up to 4,000 emails a day or more. Cool. Any questions? Drop them in here. Questions upon questions upon questions. We're also going to have Q&A at the end, so we can also do it then. All right, question 4. How many daily emails can an email address send? Same answer as the one before. If you think about support at, let's say, facebook.com or something like that, we're talking millions and millions and millions of emails a day. There really is no limit. If you're talking about, whatever it is at airbnb.com, again, millions of emails a day, no problem. What we find is that when we set these things up and manage them for ourselves and for our clients, we like to have email addresses max out at around 800 emails per day. That's after warming and building them up to that amount. There is no actual technical reason why people need to limit their email sending to like 15 emails per day or 20 emails per day. And we always are a little bit confused, a little bit chuckle to ourselves, like, that's crazy to have so many email addresses sending so few emails. And the reason why people say, oh, you can only send 25 emails per day or 30 emails per day is not sending from properly managed systems, or they're trying to go sort of undetected, like slide under the radar in some way, or they're trying to send from Google Workspace, and Google Workspace, because they're an email service provider, they impose their own limits on things. But if you think that there's some sort of actual reason why Google would only send 25, it's because they're actually trying to prevent fraud and issues that come with sending more. Just a few years ago, Google allowed you to send a lot more emails. When I started doing cold email in 2016, you could send around 400 emails per day without any issues at all from a single email address. By 2020, that number was down to around 100. And then it makes sense that it would be sliding down, 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 down. Now, my team doesn't send any emails from Google. We haven't sent from 2020 or so. And once you break away from the Google ecosystem or that kind of ecosystem, now you're not really limited by any number of emails in any normal way. You could send basically an unlimited number. We personally like to have our clients send up to 800 emails per day per email address. Part of it has to do with you're trying to slow down the car enough that if there is an issue or a problem, emails aren't going out so fast that you can't stop them. We're also trying to make sure that whatever IP address system is happening between our email sequencing tool and the backend IP addresses, we're not having too much loss, like it's sending too many requests to send emails too quickly and then it kind of gets stuck, things like that. All right. Oh, we got a question, Kim. If you previously shown up in someone's spam folder, there's a period of time we didn't have DKIM set up properly, would future emails like 3 months later automatically show up in spam too? The internet does have a memory for these things. Email systems do have a memory. In the case of DKIM, actually, I don't know, is one of our technicians on the call? Feel free to let me know if one of our technicians wants to jump in as well. In the case of DKIM, when you say you didn't have it set up properly, that can indicate a few different things. One of the things that DKIM does in particular, so for those who are not clued in, DKIM is a DNS record. It sits in the back of the website. And what DKIM does is it sits across other verification methods like SPF and DMARC. And it tells the person who received the email what kind of policies you have set up to prevent people from pretending to be you or that kind of thing. So the question is, if you had an error in your DKIM, you could have been telling everyone who receives your emails, something's wrong, put it into spam. You could have just been being like, yeah, something's wrong, put it into spam, accidentally. When you correct that, if you're emailing the same person, they might say, something's weird about this email. Last time you put it into spam, we're going to put it into spam again. That's definitely possible. If it's the same email server, type of server that's receiving it, they might do the same thing. But by and large, these things do end up sort of self-corrective. Over time, they conform to whatever system and setup you currently have. So it shouldn't necessarily be a death blow. That said, we do see long-term negative effects for prolonged periods of negative action, sometimes even lasting years. So it's possible that you did do permanent damage and you need to have a better understanding of potentially figuring out a new way to send or a new method of sending or a new domain structure of some sort in order to refresh your setup. And if you would like want a member of our team to have a look at your DKIM and give advice and maybe look at the numbers you're dealing with and give you a regular answer, after the webinar, I think probably a member of our team will reach out and we're happy to get a technician on the phone with you, chat with you free of charge as a gift to us for you joining this webinar. Let's see. Omer is from our team. I believe there's only one Omer G. That's from our team. And Omer says, as long as you're not sending the same copy and you have proper DKIM DMARC, it should be okay. So he's highlighting the fact that you probably need to change your email copy. And I'm sure there's a few other like sort of details and reasons here why he's suggesting that. But in many ways, one of the ways that filtering systems are working is they're kind of taking a snapshot of all of the information that comes through an email, including the text of the email, your DNS settings, your SPF, DMARC, DKIM, that setting, your sending name, the sending email address, all those things. And they're sort of taking a fingerprint of that. And that fingerprint is a spam fingerprint. They're like, this goes to spam. Okay. Next time you send something, if the fingerprint looks the same, it might put it into spam. The fingerprint might be slightly different. They might put it into spam. What you're trying to do is totally change it in a way that makes them think, okay, this is a different fingerprint. This is a different person. We should give this a new lease on life, give it a new shot. Perhaps that is a good answer for you. Let's see. Raleigh says, so if you're an organization that uses a shared IP with your map provider, you'd have no control over that shared IP group. So isn't it really not a gray instead, but you control, you have to have a dedicated IP? Well, so that's a great question. This is referring to a previous question. There are two kinds of shared IP pools, very basically. There are shared IP pools that you have no control over who's in them, and you might have bad neighbors and you might have problems with it. But usually people who provide shared IP pools try to do the work of making sure that everyone in the pool is not causing problems. But let's assume that it's a very low quality IP pool. Then yes, there could be problems therein. So in order to really control your own destiny, you do need to have a dedicated IP. But my suggestion is, instead of a single dedicated IP, you need multiple IP addresses. And even then, you have to be, if you're committing to having multiple IP addresses that you're sending from, you then have to organize maintenance on those IP addresses, which is usually where organizations falter, because managing IP addresses is not typically a very fun endeavor. I hope that makes sense. Cool. Okay, Dame just joined. So I can actually, Dame, do you want to say something on IP pools versus dedicated IPs? If you want to, we
Yeah,
can bring it. Oh, okay, cool.
yeah,
This is
yeah.
Dame, the
So,
voice, the
yeah,
mysterious voice of Dame is one of the technicians from our team who can go into a little more questions. And Raleigh, if you have, okay, Raleigh has a slight follow-up question, Dame. Maybe you can speak to the specific, said Marketo, Oracle, SFTC, the biggest, they don't manage those groups at all. Is that question clear enough for you, Dame, or do you?
not really. I don't understand what's the biggest. They don't
Yeah,
manage those
when
groups at
you're
all.
saying
Maybe
they
it's
don't
in
manage those
connection
groups
to
at all,
other question.
well, I think Raleigh's in question to, you have no control over that shared IP group, so it isn't really not a gray area, but instead you want to have a dedicated IP. Raleigh, are you saying that when you use um, Marketo or Oracle or Salesforce's IP pools, they
Oh, they do.
someone doesn't have any um, control over those groups. You as a user don't have control over those groups, but
Yeah,
Marketo has email infrastructure folks on their team. So does Oracle, so does Salesforce, that are minding those IPs and trying to keep them healthy and trying to keep out bad actors from those pools.
yeah. Just one
So
thing to add is I would never recommend someone doing cold emails, just utilizing a dedicated IP. And the main reasons for that is very easy to map you or to block you based on the dedicated IP. So that's number one, why you shouldn't just use a dedicated IP, or at least if you are going to go down the dedicated IP, use a lot of dedicated IPs so you can rotate through them.
yeah,
As far
and
as shared IPs, yeah, as Benny
that's a
said,
different way of saying the same thing that I was trying to explain, but probably a
more or
little bit
less,
more
I think,
succinctly. Single
well,
IPs
yeah,
put a target on your back. If you have a group of IPs, that insulates you a little bit more.
yeah,
Cool. Go on.
yeah, that would be my main answer. Pretty much you covered that.
Does that
What
make
did
sense,
I
Raleigh?
map provider though? I guess it's IMAP provider.
I think IMAP, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not related to the IPs. Yeah.
All right. Hope that answers, or at least gets close to an answer. Let's see. So question 5 is there a surefire way to land in the primary inbox? Marketers have a fear of the other inbox or the non-primary inbox, and they're constantly talking about techniques and strategies for getting into the main inbox, into the primary inbox. I do not believe that there is a way to make sure you get into the primary inbox. I think that that is a myth made by marketers. In fact, if you watch your own, let's say, Google account, it's very common that you'll see something come to the primary inbox and then a few seconds later move out of the primary inbox. That is to say that, and vice versa, where something goes to the other inbox, and then after a few seconds, after Google or whoever it is spends a little bit more processing time to go, okay, maybe this is primary, and they'll move it in. And the reason why is that most of these primary versus other inbox are based on your user actions. So every time you use your email and you fish something out of primary or look into other or vice versa, or move things from one to the other, it's running a machine learning algorithm to try to figure out your preferences. So there's no real surefire way to always go to primary, like a magical string of code or something you'd say in the email or a certain way of sending. Having unsubscribe links doesn't really dictate if something's definitely not going to go to primary or not. It's really based on user behavior, and it's a very difficult thing to predict. Hope that makes sense. Let's see. Oh, Dame said something. Let's see. So Raleigh said, if you're saying that if you want to email people that haven't agreed to get your email, you need to rotate them, dodge and weave to avoid trouble, rotate the IPs. It's not really a dodge and weave so much, Raleigh. It's that your cold email is caustic and cold email causes damage. It just does. So it damages your IP address. It also damages your domains. And a lot of concentration of damage in like a very focused thing, like a single domain or a single IP address, teaches the internet pretty quickly that maybe this isn't something that should be delivered. So you're sort of spreading out the pain a little bit across multiple touch points, which tends to slow down the process of something degrading in quality. It was sort of like if you had like a little bit of toxins and you dumped it all in one spot in your grass, that spot of your grass would die. But if you sort of sprinkled the toxins around over like a larger area of your grass, maybe some of the blades of grass would die, but the whole thing wouldn't die. That's sort of a kind of an odd analogy. I don't even have a lawn. I live in New York City. But that's what I mean by that. All right. So question 6, is email personalization necessary? The most recent kind of seem like bros, but maybe there's women involved too. The dudes and dudettes on the internet are all talking about data enrichment tools and writing these emails that use large language models or ChatGPT to write these kind of highly personalized emails. There's nothing wrong with a personalized email. There's nothing wrong with an email written by hand. There's nothing really wrong with using a ChatGPT or something to help write an email. I would say that that kind of personalization actually is not necessary. And a large number of our clients, the ones that are really, really good at cold email, don't really do any personalization at all. It isn't to say that the email they're sending isn't targeted. The emails are targeted, but they're not sort of fake personalized where you load it full of information about the person that you're emailing. If that makes sense. In other words, if you're emailing someone and by the way, Raleigh, just to jump back in, if you want to have a private call with Dame, we can DM Raleigh a link to your calendar and you can help Raleigh clear up any more confusions or answer any specific questions or look at your specific case. Feel free to go for it. So I would say that email personalization is an interesting thing to experiment with. It's not necessarily worth any more than any of the other kinds of experiments. What do I mean by that is other ways to manipulate or change your calls to action, or trying different calls to action, or trying shorter emails or longer emails, or segmenting your audience in a different way. Loading it more and more full of personalization isn't necessarily going to be the key to unlocking a very successful cold email outbound campaign. At the current, even when ChatGPT gets really sophisticated and it gets really, really smart, I still think that probably that kind of personalization isn't going to be as important as having a value proposition that really resonates with an audience and segmenting and things like that that work well. Hope that answers the question. Question 7, should you send to catch-all email addresses? When you take an email list and you run it through an email checking software like Unbounce or something like that, what they're trying to do is let you know which emails will definitely bounce, which ones won't bounce, and which ones might bounce. And oftentimes, might bounce emails are classified as catch-all email addresses. To explain what a catch-all email address is, if you use the analogy of a very large office building, like I'm in New York City, so let's say there's a Bloomberg building. On the bottom floor of the Bloomberg building is a mailroom, a physical mailroom. If the person delivers 2 letters, one to Bloomberg and one to the small doctor's office next door, when they walk into the small doctor's office and the letter says Dr. Stevens on it, they know right away if there's a Dr. Stevens in that doctor's office or not. And if there is no Dr. Stevens, they'll hand it right back to the letter. That's a bounce. They'll be like, there's no Dr. Stevens here. Take this away, throw it in the trash. If you bring that same letter into the Bloomberg office and you give it to them, they're not going to know if there's a Dr. Stevens who works inside Bloomberg right away. There might be one, there might be 2, there might be a Dr. Stevens who is a contractor who may or may not have an email address that's proper or an office. So there's sort of a little bit of time that they spend to try to make sure that this gets delivered to the right place. So the first thing they do is they accept the letter. Catch-all email addresses basically are emails sent to email systems that receive all the email. They just say, yeah, we'll take that. We'll sort it out later. Sometimes those bounce later, 12 hours later, 24 hours later, 2 hours later, 30 seconds later, whatever. But for now, they're going to accept the email. I would say that catch-all email addresses sometimes can be the ones that generate the leads and you're happy and excited about, but overall, they tend to bounce at a higher rate. So I would be very sensitive to the number of catch-alls that are being mixed in with the other emails that you're sending that are good, and make sure that you're not concentrating catch-alls in one day or 1 hour or one sort of email session. Now, if the majority of your market is catch-all, you have to be more sensitive to the idea that your ratios are going to be off because you're going to be sending emails and a larger percentage of them are going to be bouncing. So you need to maybe supplement with more warming or think critically about other ways to organize your email. If the catch-all percentage is relatively low, then it's probably not going to hurt you that bad. Anyway, let's see. I'm looking in the chat now. Sending images in cold emails generally not recommended. If you really must, then second or third follow-up can be okay-ish, but make sure the image should be smaller than 70 kilobyte in memory size. Okay. I'm not sure what that was in response to.
That's my answer to Kim, who asked about like if they really want to send an image in a cold emails, and he heard that someone saying like send it to a third email. In general, I will just say no, don't send images. But if you really, really must, then okay-ish in terms of second or third follow-up, as long as the image is, I would say, even smaller than 70 kilobytes if possible.
Sure. I think that usually these things end up a little bit philosophical, meaning not philosophical in what Dom is talking about. He's talking about technicalities of sending and whatnot. If on a sort of lead gen style scenario, it's a little bit hard for me to imagine that the third email, the one that contains the image, that's going to be the one that's going to convert. But it's possible that is the case. Sort of don't really know. That maybe if someone's really confident. Another thing you can do, Kim, that oftentimes isn't talked about but is pretty important, is that if you really, really feel, or someone really feels that third email with the image is like the one, in email tools like Apollo.io, you could throttle down just the third email. So maybe the first 2 emails combined are sending 400 emails a day or 1,000 emails a day or whatever. And that third email has an image. You could just say the third email is only allowed to send 50 per day. So then now you immediately change the sending ratio to be the ones that include images is far fewer number, which means that it's less likely to get out of control, bounce scenario, just pull everything down. If your third email, if there's a magical day where there aren't any first and second emails and it's all third emails and third email has a image in it, you very well may completely blow up your domain, put everything in spam, and have trouble weeks or even months trying to get yourself out of that hole. So consider throttling that third email, the one with the image in it, down so as not to overwhelm and send everything with an image in it. If you must send an email with an image. Hope that makes sense. Okay. Question 8. Chrisley, are you here?
Yes, I am.
Chrisley is a member of our team. Oh, your head's not centered in the frame.
Oh no, sorry.
There you go. Chrisley is another member of our team. He's a revenue director. He also works directly with a handful of clients and is pretty clued into this stuff. So the question is, what call to action is most effective? The answer is there's a lot of calls to action. You could ask people for a meeting. That's less effective, whatever. We go from like high bar call to action, like there's a high bar, you got to jump over it. Like, do you want to have a meeting at 2 p.m.? It's very specific, all the way down to low bar. Chrisley, what calls to action are you seeing succeed these days? Or which ones are sort of newish to you or you're
Yeah,
seeing
absolutely.
clients succeed with?
Well, definitely not in the high bar category. You want your call to action to be something that is not costly to the reader, if you will, like they don't feel like they have to have an extra lift and not necessarily giving homework. So, for example, if I'm sending a cold email talking to lawyers about, hey, here's how you can effectively retain new business or something like that. In the call to action might be something to the effect of, hey, we have this thought leadership I'd love to share with you. Would it be okay for me to send it? And now the key there is then under that, if you quickly summarize that thought leadership with maybe 2 or 3 bullet points, now that reader, they're looking at the summary. Oh, okay, that is something I need some help with. Let me check that out. Then it's almost like 2 or 3x potentially I should say 2, 3x, but you get a much significantly higher response rate, and people actually reply back to the email saying,
Right.
sure, send that over. And then maybe even reply again with the effect of, hey, I'd love to kind of talk about this. We see those type of emails where you're engaging the prospect to reply back versus just clicking a link to either leave the email or go click on the calendar link. Those are not performing to the manner that they used to, as Benny was mentioned
So to
earlier.
summarize, you're saying that not only if the action is a low action, like a low, easy to do, like a reply with a one word, sure, send it over. And you actually sweeten the call to action by saying what they're going to get out of that really simple reply. Now they not only feel that it's easy to reply, but they know what they're going to get. Their brains are primed. Oh, you're going to send that interesting thing over to me. And you showed me why that thing's interesting. Is
Exactly.
that, yeah, I think that's very clever. I think that makes a lot of sense. And it makes sense that that's going to be more effective than something like, how's Tuesday at 2 to connect. Now, there are industries where that can work. Chrissy, you and I have seen
Absolutely.
examples where there's a certain class of folks and a certain class of products that they actually prefer a very specific and direct thing. And keep in mind, we currently have 70 or 80 clients, but over the last 2, 3, 4 years, we worked with hundreds of clients and setting things up. We're oftentimes surprised at the things that do work. So there is no specific call to action that is most effective, but use Chrisley's advice and think about if they're a high bar or low bar and how you can work to lower the bar to make it easier for them to reply, and then even consider trying to sweeten the reply so they know what they're going to get out of it. And that same method can work when you're asking someone to do a meeting, because you can say, I'd love to have a meeting and show you this, and then you can tell them what they're going to get out of the meeting, and that makes it a little bit easier for them to choose. And then scheduling a meeting is a little bit of confusion, so you can say things like, can I send over a link to my calendar, or something like that? Or can I send over some times that work for me and maybe some will match up with you? Because then again, they're back to just replying with something like, sure, as opposed to having to use their brain and do a heavy lift.
Yeah, the
So
key thing
next
is just
question. Oh, sorry, no, go on.
No, I was just gonna say the real key there is just you want to make it as easy for your prospects as possible to move on to the next step.
Yeah. And this piggybacks with what kinds of value props make sense. And this is a little bit of a trick question. Businesses have a value proposition. Senders has a value proposition. The local, deli has some sort of value proposition. The reason why it's a little bit of a trick question is what value proposition makes sense to offer. Oftentimes, the value proposition that makes the most sense to offer is the value proposition that interests the customer the most. That's not necessarily the main value proposition of your business. What do I mean by that? Let's imagine, this isn't true, but let's imagine Senders had the biggest and wildest library of deliverability content on the planet or something. Maybe the value proposition of, do you need someone to help you with email deliverability and take it over for you and you pay a monthly, maybe that value proposition is actually a really hard value proposition for them to grasp onto. But the value proposition of, can I share over a link to our vast resources of whatever, that value proposition might be very enticing. So what we find clients do is, in order to start conversations or to steer people into conversations that are valuable, they're choosing a value proposition from their company that is most interesting to the people they're emailing, not necessarily pitching the value proposition of the business. If that makes sense. Chris, anything to add there?
No, I mean, you hit it spot on there. It's really about you want to provide the value that they need. So that's kind of what I was mentioning earlier with the lawyers. If you know, hey, our target base, they're all kind of suffering with this thing, and sure, we can assist them with that, but that's not necessarily the whole enchilada of what we do. For your cold email, you almost want to treat it, instead of like a billboard for your service, more like almost like a request hotline to a certain degree, where you're just providing that specific value for that thing to be the hook. And then once you've hooked them in, you can then give them the whole dinner, if you will.
Yeah, makes sense. Mixing those metaphors. I always do it too. Yeah. Okay. And final question for the folks here. Which of the 4 big thrash metal bands is the best? Is it Megadeth, Metallica, Slayer, or Anthrax? I'm not sure if anyone knows the definitive answer. Actually, before I answer this, because I'm going to answer which one I think is the best, let's answer Robert's question here. Outside of analyzing ratios, as you talked about earlier, what do you recommend for an agency that wants to monitor their cold email infrastructure that's diversified across Google Workspace, Outlook, private infrastructure, MailForge, as well as even resellers willing to set up Google Outlook inboxes? I want to be able to see clearly that a certain reseller or private infrastructure is bringing us down. Oh, and System of a Down. Yeah, that's not on my list, but I get you. System of a Down, that's cool. No problem. No problem there. I see what you're doing here. You're making a relationship between system of a down, email system. You're worried that your systems will go down, etc. So I don't have a definitive answer for you, Robert. We don't diversify across service providers for our clients. We don't need to. We don't use like a mix of Google and Outlook and all these different tools in order to do it. We're much more meat and potatoes. We understand how to keep email addresses and IP addresses and domains healthy and happy, and we scale our clients using the IP addresses that we manage ourselves. So I don't really know. There are tools out there that are built for email admins that might have that kind of functionality for you. I don't know, Omer and Dame, do you know of any tools that an agency can use to look across all those things? I would say that, Robert, one of the things that folks do is they tend to, that are trying to manage this well, is they pipe all of the emails, the data for all the emails, open rates, reply rates, click rates, etc. They pipe them to one dashboard, and then it's easier to slice and dice and analyze them. You could even use something like Google's data tool or something to just like pipe into one place, and then you can look based on all the different email addresses, and if you have them tagged properly, what you can usually see is if something's having a problem, the open rates, for example, if those are being tracked, take a dip, or the reply rates take a dip or something like that. An official sender statement. As ardent supporters of musical excellence, we proudly recognize Megadeth for their groundbreaking contributions to thrash metal, combining technical mastery with powerful lyrics to leave an enduring legacy in the music industry. Yes, I think Megadeth's the best. I've seen Slayer live, I've seen Megadeth, I've seen Metallica. I'm not a huge metal guy overall, but when I was young, I definitely was into Megadeth, which I think is the coolest. All right, we've already answered a bunch of questions, but now's your chance to answer any more. I'm not going to push more questions. If you don't have any more questions, we can wrap up soon. I'll quickly mention that you can reach me at benny@senders.co. You can reach Chrisley, who you saw at chrisley@senders.co. Dame is also available. It's Dame at DAME@senders.co. You can book a meeting with members of our team at senders.co. And then we have sponsors for this. And each one has an offer. Nacho, software discounts. It's great. Crazy and Friends, you can get a free marketing audit. They're our marketing partner, and they work with a whole bunch of our clients. They're separate from us, but they work with a whole bunch of our clients because we're focused on cold email stuff. So if there's SEO involved, if there's content creation involved, if there's Google ads, there's Facebook ads, there's LinkedIn advertising, Crazy and Friends are great for that. They do a free marketing audit. They help you out. It's great. Startup Stack is another place to get startup discounts. Very nice people. Secure Labs does compliance consultations. Check them out. And Forecaster does CFO services, finance stuff. Cool. And the links are all here in the chat. Jump back, Q&A, last chance, 2 minutes, 120 seconds. If not, we are going to wrap and give everyone back 7 whole minutes. I'm not sure what you can do with 7 minutes. Definitely enough time to get a glass of water or something. Any questions?
There was one about unsubscribe link here.
Oh, really?
Do you recommend using it in cold emails? We definitely do. The main reason is to stay compliant with the can spam law. I guess Chrisley answered that, but yeah. The main reason is to be staying compliant with the can spam law. And another thing is I would rather have them unsubscribe than mark my email as spam. That's also important.
That's a strong point. Yeah. If people who aren't happy to get your email, you want to give them a way to show their upsetness. And the best way for them to show their upsetness is to just mark something to unsubscribe from it, not to mark it as spam. If you mark it as spam, it sort of sends a signal to the internet that this is really bad. And unsubscribe that you respect is a much safer, easier way for them to feel like they're opting out. So we always recommend unsubscribe links. We're not lawyers. We don't claim to understand all the ins and outs of the Can Spam Act, but we do recommend that you read the Can Spam Act and the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission of the United States, their guidelines around email, and do your best to follow them. There is no real rule in the Can Spam Act that says you have to have an unsubscribe link. Really, Google says that marketers should have a proper unsubscribe link. We decide for our clients, and based on the systems that we use, we require all of our clients to have an unsubscribe link, and we're happy that they have it. We don't find that hurts anything really at all. It actually helps a lot. So that's our thoughts on unsubscribe links. And let's see, I think there was one more question. Let's see. Maybe there wasn't. Okay. Oh, it was deleted. There was a question that was deleted. Is that what you're trying to tell me? Yeah. I thought it was a good question. What was it? No? No questions? Last chance. Last chance with the question. So someone asked, do we have a plan lower than the first one? Robert, we don't have a plan lower than the plan, but if you do have questions, comments, concerns, or there's something specific that you need or you want someone's attention on what you're working on, feel free to set up a call with a member of our team. And this might sound a little bit funny to say on a sales related and sort of deliverability related thing. We actually don't typically work with agencies. We typically work directly with clients that have sending volume needs. So that isn't to say that there isn't a world that we could work together or can't work together, but just keep that in mind when you reach out with us. Almost all of our clients are just direct clients we work with. But we do appreciate you coming and asking questions and want to be as helpful as we can. All right, we did it, guys. We got through all the hard questions. Now we can post this up on the internet and then have all the people that disagree with me come chase me with digital email pitchforks. Right, Dame and Chris Lee? Just kidding. Anyway, thanks so much. Thanks to all the sponsors. Thanks for everyone for coming. Oh, wait, one question. Go for it, Kim. Is the question gonna say, will you meet me at Chipotle in 5 minutes? DMARC relax for strict or whatever, LOL. Are you trying to set up DMARC right now on your own? What I recommend you do is set up a call with Dame. Dame, can you send Kim a note and set up a call, and Dame can help you make the decisions about how to configure your DMARC. Does that sound good, Kim? Yeah, free of charge. Dame will help you get your DMARC set up. Strict versus not strict doesn't really matter so much. Oh, there's a link to Dame's calendar. Anyone else who's here who'd like to talk with Dame about a specific aspect of their technical stuff, we'll make Dame available as a nice thing. Please don't waste his time. he's a real person with important work to do, but certainly for Kim's case. Yeah, there's a comment there. There's a comment down there based on Kim's question. Cool, and I'll let everyone read that comment. And then in 60 seconds, I'm going to end this webinar. Thanks, everyone. I really appreciate you all coming, checking this out. I hope it was informative. You learned something. And go listen to some Megadeth or something. Bye, everyone. Thanks.